Hey gamers, welcome back to a brand new DSP video. I want to discuss my general thoughts on the Truth Seekers interview DSP was on. Going into it, I was thinking it was going to be one of two things. Either it was going to be an op by Kino Casino to gas Philip even more, or whatever, or it was going to be a Kino Casino op to be another major Grill Phil segment, which it ended up being. Personally, if you were to ask me which interview did I like more, the side scrollers or the truth seekers, I would go with side scrollers personally, because side scrollers seemed more impartial and seemed more fair, in my opinion, in the sense that they allowed DSP to talk and it was actually a good back and forth. And to me, the only part that I felt was a little sus was just the Keemstar part, and that's fine. That's whatever. But overall, I thought it was a very good interview because it actually did kind of challenge Phil a little bit more than most. And you saw Phil really just start to confuse and stammer and just kind of look around and this and that. So I kind of liked it a lot more in the sense that it was a little more critical than you'd expect. And by the end, you hear DSP describe about the Side Scrolls interview now, and it's like a completely different interview than what it actually was, it seemed, in his perspective. Because you watch it now, and it's like, okay, this is just a natural interview. It's going back and forth or whatever. But then you listen to what DSP describes it as, and it's like, oh, they attacked me, and they did this, and it's like, dude, what are you talking about? They were very, cordial with you, and they were very impartial, and they wanted to hear you out. It was actually, honestly, the most fair interview DSP could have asked for. Despite how he feels about the debriefing they did the day after, I think he should have been happy with that interview as a whole. Because it wasn't like they sat there and said, you're full of shit or whatever. Compare that with the Truth Seeker show, and, I didn't know much about this YouTuber, to be honest. I heard, he talked about aliens, and I heard here and there that he also targets scammers. So it's like, okay. So that's why I thought I could go one of those two ways initially. But in the eyes of DSP, he probably should have done some research. I think that to me is my only thing I loved about this interview, was the fact that it really illustrates how little DSP even researches people who want to interview him. He probably does very surface level research, because he kept describing him as a alien guy, and maybe he said one time or something that he also goes after scammers or whatever, but he never once thought that maybe he thinks I'm a scammer or whatever. But I think that he was also encouraged by Kino Casino to go on a show, so I think that's also another aspect of it. And I left thinking, I wonder, because obviously Kino Casino's not going to do another thing like this, right after or a month later, but I wonder if they're going to do it again at some point in the future. And if they do that again, I wonder how long it would take for DSP to slowly start to question their intentions. But that's yet to be seen. Because as everyone expected, after the interview, he was already like, well, PPP is on my side. He said that he didn't know if Steve was going to do this or whatever, despite that PPP was the one that came up with the lie detector test idea. The interview itself with Truth Seeker, Steve, I think this is going to sound very confusing, but bear with me. I don't think it was necessarily I don't want to say it was an unfair interview, but I don't think it was that professional or fair compared to side scrollers, in my opinion. Not to say that Steve was awful, but I think there's a lot of moments that kind of created an environment that allows DSP to say, look how unhinged he is. He was yelling at me, talking over me, and this and that. Now, in my opinion, when I was watching the interview, to me, I think it's very obvious that when you get into an argument with DSP, you're going to naturally want to talk over him. I mean, I think, where I'm sitting watching this, it's easy for me to say, well, he should have been more calm and collected. But, doing DSP videos, it's very obvious that this guy can just you listen to enough times of him talking in circles, you're gonna naturally just lose your patience. So I don't necessarily blame Steve for like doing that or yelling and just trying to like illustrate a point. So I don't blame him for that. But I think it is in the responsibility of the host to kind of keep that in mind and try to persevere through that. I think there has to be some like balance between that. But it's totally understandable because DSP is definitely the kind of guy that's going to talk in circles and give you a lot of like information. And you see that with like, I think it was either the June or Tolo interview he did. I want to say June, where he asked him like such a long winded question. And June was like, you gave me a lot of information. Can you like narrow the question down or something like that? And it's like, that's the kind of guy DSP is. He just puts so much information that you lose track of what your initial point is. And that's clearly a tactic that a lot of people do, like DSP, to keep their grift hidden or to make sure that you lose interest in what you're initially grilling him on. And you see that a lot in the Truth Seeker. But I think the aspect I like the most about it is the fact that, as I said before, he didn't know what he was getting into. He assumed it was discussing his past. Now, this is a little insidious, to be kind of fair, because that, in DSP's perspective, could actually mean a lot of things. Because if you were to interview like anyone else, like Brad Pitt, Mega 64, whatever, you're gonna naturally ask them about their past, like how they started and this and that, which is a positive like aspect. But when it comes to DSP, who's a lolcow, a known lolcow, that has a reputation of like being a scammer and this and that, when someone is interested in their past, that he should have started to scratch his chin saying, this could mean that he's gonna dig up detractor memes or old scams or scandals or whatever the fuck, because he's such a problematic individual that the nature of discussing his past could really mean almost anything. Uh, so again, that's on him. I mean, he should have like probed a little bit more and kind of try to get a better structure, because I understand why DC might have feel betrayed, but when you look at the context surrounding Truth Seeker, even the email he sent him, like the language is very like, if you read kind of between the lines, it's very clear what Truth Seeker was getting at. But on face value, it seems like, okay, this is just gonna be like, oh, how I started on YouTube and where I am now. But that is not necessarily what it means either. Like, there's a lot of stuff that DSP can't pick up on. As I said, this goes into the theory that he can't read, to be honest, because uh, a lot of people will not just outright say a lot of things. They'll put stuff in between the lines. That way, it's like it's on a full way lie or whatever, or that they just assume that you can pick up on it because of social cues and stuff like that. And he can't really pick up on that, which can go into other theories people have theorized, such as him being autistic or whatever. Uh, so that could also be another instance of that. The other thing I liked the most about this interview that I was just kind of like laughing internally is, this is when you look at this interview. Let's take DSP out and put Wings in DSP's place, and DSP is reacting to it. DSP would definitely go on and saying, "Oh, why would Wings do this? He look at this man. Guess he goes on the show, and guess what? More drama." Because that's what he said about Wings in the Wings documentary when it comes to Keemstar and this and that. And now DSP is being put in that own position through Kino Casino. And it's very ironic and funny to me to see that happen to him, because he keeps, because throughout his career, he keeps flexing how he's not an idiot and he can't be tricked and he won't do drama stunts or anything like that. And he kind of like bragged about that over Wings and Rich and Boogie and all these other lolcows. But you look at him now and he's doing exactly what he bragged that he would never do when it came to Wings or Boogie or whatever. But you could even argue this is even worse, because at least to a degree, you could probably argue that Wings can deduce, okay, I'm doing this thing with Keemstar, this might be like drama, but I'm just gonna do it anyway. Fuck it, I'm just gonna shoot this shit and maybe whatever. Like, he at least goes in expecting what's to happen, and usually the fallout is just like people just don't like the answers, basically, or whatever. Meanwhile, with this, it's really just DSP has very blind faith in Kino Casino with these little setups that they're putting him through, and it's wild just how much he is like going with it half the time. Like when you see the Grill Phil segments on Smart Guys, you could kind of argue, okay, maybe he's in on it, maybe it's a joke, whatever. But this was an interview that PPP kept encouraging DSP to go on. He goes on it, and then PPP clearly is like saying, "Yeah, I didn't know Steve would do that. Whoopsies." And DSP was like, "Oh, see, he didn't know, guys." And it's like, yeah, of course he's gonna say that, obviously. So it's another instance of like, where is DSP gonna go now with Kino Casino? How far is this relationship gonna go? Because he still believes that they're looking out for him for, as a friend or whatever. So it's curious on that level, and I think that's the thing I like the most about the interview. Like, as a whole, you don't learn anything new. There's nothing damning in it or anything. It's exactly what you'd expect. It's the side scrollers, as I said, was way better because it was a civil interview that actually was critical of him, and DSP could not weasel his way out. This, I think, there is a way for DSP to weasel out of this interview by saying, well, see, he is yelling at me and this and that. But the other aspect that I think is very important takeaway is just how flimsy DSP is as a person. Because, even on face value, like, you'd think that, okay, DSP may at least acknowledge that the bank leagues had more stuff that was lining up with his day offs, because for years DSP kept saying, well, the bank league said that I had like a lot of dogs. I don't have dogs in my basement. And it's like, okay, but there's other stuff that is like very like connected to your day off and other circumstances. Like, there's a lot of stuff in there. Like, if Steve focused on like the other aspects, like, because I think you saw the 2 Comcast bills or the 2 Comcast lines in the bank leaks, and he could have brought that up because that is something DSP did say before in other things. But he kept focusing on curls and trolls, which, again, I get it because that is something that's very like tied and connected, and the person on that page was definitely Kat. It's just funny to me that DSP like saw that and didn't even acknowledge it. He just kept saying, "No, man, they're fake. You can't." And he kept trying to die on the hill of, you can't prove it's real. You can't prove it's beyond a shadow of a doubt. Meanwhile, like, even Broside Phil kept trying to bring up that, like, look, we're not saying it's 100%, but with what you're telling us on your streams and what the bank leaks show, like, there's at least over 50%. Like, it's not far-fetched. Like, this isn't a outlandish thing to believe in the scheme of things. But he kept saying, well, it could have been manufactured or this. And I was thinking about this too, because, you could argue, he said like a day before, I'm going to get my haircut tomorrow. I mean, of course, that would imply that there's going to be a charge for the haircut that day. Like, those charges are not like, hidden either, because he's telling us it's just where he's getting his haircut is hidden. But at that point, he could just say who it is, because even if you take it down the logic of, if he says where he goes, that place will be harassed, right? People right now think he's going to Curls and Twirls. That business is still operational, at least from what I remember, and it's still getting like business. There's been nothing affected by it by anyone at that point. But whatever. Like, I get it to a degree. But again, he just didn't want to acknowledge anything. Like he could have at least said like, he could have even said like, Yeah, Cat goes there. I go somewhere else. Even though like that may not be easy to believe because he said before that Cat arranges the haircuts. So, like the bank leaks is an interesting aspect of it. I kind of wish it was more than just that. Because I feel like you know bank accounts and bank information is very sensitive data. Like I don't think anyone in any circumstance would be comfortable, even if it was behind the scenes, would want to go over their bank account with a random person. Like that's why I was like, the bank leaks is like it's interesting, but this isn't something that I'd chase personally. Again, that's why I like about the side scrollers podcast. That at least was like a little bit more like fair in where it was going, because asking for a WWE champions account isn't that damning. Like you're not gonna magically know his personal information by if you know his username was down from the rafters or whatever. So that's why the bank leaks is like it's interesting to see him like kind of like in his reactions to it and his defense to it, because it wasn't convincing and it wasn't strong. But I can understand on a personal level that like yeah, no one is gonna feel comfortable like just saying yeah, let's open a bank account, guys. And I know that's not what like people are asking. They're just asking for like old statements that if he changes bank account now, that he should be fine showing that. So but I still think just in the nature of bank accounts, like I don't think anyone would be comfortable just going through that personally. Uh, but again, like a lot of the stuff that was going on in that interview, I thought was just funny in just how obvious it was that Diaz was just talking in circles and what he wanted to do to Steve, uh, when he was pressed on something. Because, as I said, like I understand why Steve was like talking over him and like cutting him off, because if you're just gonna talk in circles, there's no use in like hearing it out. But I kind of wish that he was more direct in saying, "Can you get to the point? Like I'm gonna let you speak, but just get to the point." And then if he starts saying, "Okay, so when I was 1 years old, I was in diapers," and he's like, "Oh, okay, like I don't need to know. Like, can you just like get to the point you're making?" Like something like that. I think would have gone a long way, and then let him talk a little bit, and then maybe get to him to do this whole like song and dance. Then said, okay, so you know I understand like what you're saying, but I didn't need this preamble to get to that. Why can't you just get to the chase or whatever? Which at this point, I kind of wonder if it would be more interesting if there was an interview with DSP that confronted his behavior and how he acts, because you're not going to get anything out of him when it comes to confronting him on his begging, confronting him on this, because he's always going to say, "Oh man, I'm saying an observation, I'm joking, I'm doing that." Like you're not getting anything out of him that's going to be an epiphany to him. But if you start questioning his attitude and behavior, I wonder how that would play out, because there is stuff about his behavior that I think would turn people away just by nature. Like, yeah, the begging would turn people away and this and that. But when you see how he treats viewers, how he treats hosts on shows, and all this other stuff, you kind of understand that this guy either is a mental abusive person, or he's just very very dense in how he doesn't know how he carries himself. Like that's really the takeaway I got from that interview the most, is that this person just doesn't he thinks that his evidence is like enough to clear any issue, but the evidence he brings are like happenstance, or not really happenstance, but just like trust me bro. Like there was this big like debate about the detective where he was like, well, okay, Bro Seinfeld had the case number, but the detective I talked to was a woman. He talked to a dude. But like, I feel that there is specific context in that, because there's always more than one detective, and who knows, maybe there were two detectives working that case, or that more than one detective knew the file. Like you can assume. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this field, so maybe I'm talking out my ass, but I'd assume that the person that DSP filed with could have been a woman detective. Okay, she He files it and puts it away. When Broside Phil inquired about it, it could have been another detective that was on shift that day that happened to be a guy and said, "Oh yeah, like, here's the file. I know this guy." Because the other thing to remember, and it's like, and this hit me when I was listening to this interview. DSP did talk to the cops before. He said that back in the swatting in 2015, he had notified the cops in his local precinct that this could happen to me. I could be swatted or whatever. And they're like, okay, bye. And and then they arrive for the swatting, this and that. So the person that Broside Phil who talked to could have easily just remembered Phil in one of those previous instances when it came to the swatting or even the tire, because he talked to the police for the tire. Like, the fact that two detectives may know who he is and the male detective may remember him, that doesn't necessarily mean he remembered him from that specific case. He could have remembered him generally. So that is very circumstantial. Like, oh, see, I talked to a different detective. Like, yeah, but you have the same case file. Like, that's more than enough to connect it. But there's all this other stuff that is all circumstantial, and obviously he's not gonna budge on it because he doesn't want. Because the one thing to take away to remember is that he didn't want side scrollers to have any proof if he was or wasn't down from the rafters. He clearly did not want them to have clickbait for that interview. He withheld it so that interview can get his views, his initial views, and this, and then whatever DSP sends him may not get the same amount of views versus the interview. So he's very sneaky in that way. Same with June. Like, June was doing a documentary, and he waited until that documentary was live on YouTube for him to announce that he was down for the rafters the whole time, which is a behavior I feel is when you don't want someone to have any nugget in their little video to get views. So he didn't want Steve to really have anything to work with, so he could have a massive successful interview off of him. Just say, see, I got DSP, he is a scammer. Instead, he wants these people to have this ambiguous, is he or isn't he kind of things. Nothing conclusive. The only person that's allowed to give you conclusive information is DSP on his own videos, in his own streams, and this and that, which is very selfish, because technically you could argue that if he came clean on any of these shows, side scrollers, truth seekers, or whatever, he could use that as a benefit. Like, because the guise of what truth seekers was trying to get at was saying, oh, well, if you come clean here, you're paving your way to redemption, this and that. And sure, like, you could argue that truth seekers is going to get the views on that or whatever benefit, be it through exposure, because DSP really thinks exposure is very lucrative or whatever, but that could also, like, trickle down to him or whatever. But he shouldn't matter necessarily if Steve would get that kind of attention, despite the fact that he always says that these people always are going to get money and success for grilling him anyway. So if it doesn't matter one way or the other, why not just clear the air about this controversy that is surrounding you? But again, DSP doesn't want these other people to have anything that they can profit off, clickbait, or whatever. So he defaults to trying to give them half answers that are just responses. They may not be truthful, but they're an answer. So it's very sneaky and devious how he handles these kind of confrontations, which makes him very unreliable. And he gets upset, and that's kind of what was going on in that interview. The whole time they kept saying, you're unreliable, you're not really proving anything, you're not really telling us anything. You just keep saying, you just keep asking us, can we prove it 100%? But we obviously can't. But this is enough to make a case that there could be something there. That's why we're coming to you to clarify this. And he's like, well, no, man, look. And if it is true, it doesn't matter. Which is like the most well, I guess it is inappropriate, but it's kind of disrespectful to kind of say that. Like, no one's gonna go to court. Like, as much as DSP loves to play courthouse, no one is gonna go to a courthouse and say, well, even if it is true, who cares, right? And then get away with it. Like, and then even outside of the courthouse, it's just a sign of disrespect that you're not respecting the person enough to even like acknowledge what they've shown is is at least something to think about. Like he's not even like thinking, I can see why you think that, but like, look, there's other like salons or hair or barbers that I go to for my hair. Like I could see why you think it's curls and twirls because of that, but I don't go there. Yeah, you saw that picture of Cat, but that could have been, but you know, that could have been that one time, and maybe it's something else or whatever. Like he wasn't even willing to even empathize or like understand that how some people can see it that way. And I think Steve even tried to say that to him, like, you don't see how people can like make this connection. And he was like, well, look, man, you can't prove it, and no one cares. But like, we aren't talking about no one, like, when people are confronting him about this, they're not talking about the eyes of his fans. They're saying like, people are bringing this up and you're not answering it, and you keep, and it goes in a lot of directions. Like you watch this, and the whole time, like DSP, like in the past, always says, "No one believes me. No one's giving me the chance to say my case and this and then talk back." And he's given these opportunities, and then he's like, this is how he handles it. Like you can argue all you want about like, as much as I said like, well, I think Steve was, was kind of like losing it and like yelling at DSP in some cases. All I want, I can make that case, but at the end of the day, DSP wasn't going in to even understand what Steve is saying. Like he didn't even acknowledge it. So as much as I can say that, and how much DSP could also say that, uh, it wasn't even that DZ was even reliable as a narrator there, because he wasn't even giving the stuff that he was showing the benefit of, like, well, I can see why you think that, but this is why it isn't. Instead, he just defaults to nobody cares, and uh you can't prove it 100%. But he says over the years that no one's giving him the opportunity, but he's not explaining why this is a misunderstanding. Like he's just saying you can't prove this is real, and it's like, okay, but look at this. People are gonna say that this is damning because the coincidence is just too much, and you're not saying anything that is changing that belief. You're just saying, who cares if it's true, and we can't prove it 100%, which is stuff that like guilty people say a lot half the time. Like if someone knows that they're guilty and the other person's trying to prove it, they're gonna say, well, you can't prove it. Like, sure, you have the knife, but and you don't have the fingerprints. How do you know it's me? Because some old guy who doesn't have good vision may have seen me. Who knows, right? Like it's that kind of like flimsy arguments that just don't really hold up when you're like pressing for it, and instead of like at least acknowledging the connection. Because if he said like, I could see where you guys are think it's me, and why you think I go to curls and twirls, it's not because I go to somewhere else, because the place I go to is this or that or anything. Like, I mean, at some point he could have just said like, look, this is a receipt of my haircut during that period. That's actually, I go to a different hairstylist now though. Like, he lives in Seattle. You're telling me there's like only one place to get your haircut? Like, only one place exists? I mean, I get it. Like, once you find someone that you trust to cut your hair, like, you don't want to like risk finding someone else. But you know, there might be someone that may do a better job. Regardless, I mean, there's multiple places to get your hair cut. It's not, curls and trolls isn't the only business on the block. Uh, so it's all this stuff that leads into this, and I just think at the end of the day, this may not have been my favorite interview, but it was definitely an interview DSP deserves. Because when you start telling people a hard line, guys, you gotta prove your point. Bring evidence. You're kind of opening the door for this kind of interview to happen because of that very thing. So it's very like, it was a very interesting interview in that regard, of just more of just like how he reacts to it and onwards. And then the Cope podcast he did over it was kind of funny because in the interview he says like no ill will. Then the next day he's kind of shitting on Steve and saying that oh he snaked me and this and that. Uh, but he went on there anyway. Like he should have been more thorough with the people who wanted to interview him anyway. Uh, there was things I wanted to talk about. I can't think of it now. I had it like earlier and it escaped me. Whatever. I mean it was overall a whatever interview. Like I don't think it was the worst interview. Like it's not as bad as the quartering where the quartering did like no research. Oh, now I remember what it was. And it's because it's something in the Co podcast. He really made it a big deal that Steve stole or plagiarized the spreadsheets and the data that Kiwi Farms made, which Steve just said I researched. I looked into this, which is very generic. These statements can literally mean because I could say I researched cancer. I looked up cancer. Does that mean I'm claiming that I made the discovery of cancer? No. I'm saying I researched it, which is going to like articles, reading about it, and other people's findings and this and that, which is what it means. Like he want and I'm thinking in the back of my head, the theory with me on this is I think secretly DSP wants to kind of send Kiwi Farms to go after Steve and have them like harass him for doing this, which is really like it's the most Christian level thinking you could have. And that's why I think DSP was trying to get at that. Not directly, because he doesn't want anyone to say, see, he's sending them to them. He's saying, well, if I was Kiwi Farms, I'd be pissed. Which is very, like, it's either unintentionally coded to, like, have Kiwi Farms go after Steve, or he's just saying it just to get them to, like, think, like, yeah, that is fucked up. Let's go after him, guys. Because that is kind of how DSP thinks. Like, he has very, like, questionable thinking, which I think a lot of people make the argument that he might be autistic because this is kind of like Christian level thinking. We all know Christian's headspace, right? So it's very clear that DSP didn't really care. Like he goes on to thinking it's gonna be about his like history as a content creator, which is why the first like 30 minutes like, yeah, man, I love video games. When I got laid off and I was like, I gotta get food, guys. I gotta pay the bills. I just got a condo. So I decided to brave it out and say, I'm gonna record this. So it was very clear that he like rehearsed that part of it. But then when you start to see that Steve had a little bit more on the plate, he was like, oh boy. And you kind of like see that like he didn't know this was what he was walking into. Meanwhile, like, leading up to it, people were like, yeah, he's going on to the truthseeker, the guy who does aliens and deals with scammers. So it's like the people on the outside knew what was gonna happen, but the person who agreed to the interview doesn't know. Which, as I said before, the thing I love the most about this interview that was like Christmas to me is that it is a go-to example that DSP does very, very minimal amount of research. Probably even less since he was sent by Kino Casino to do the Truth Seekers. Because I guarantee he only based his goodwill into the Truth Seeker just because he was on Kino Casino. I think if he was on Kino Casino, he would, and the Kino Casino thing didn't happen. Let's say that this thing never happened. Truth Seeker was then interested in getting DSP on. DSP might have done some research, a little bit more research than he does now, and say, okay, this guy does scammers. I think he's gonna think I'm a scammer. No, but since Kino Casino was able to like season it a little bit more, he was more willing to believe it and trust him, and not do any real research. Because you kind of see that even with people bringing up the stuff Kino Casino said about DSP on their own stream, like the next day they say, hey, you saw that PB said that you're stupid and you should die? And he's like, well, he said that? Well, he must be razzing. This is probably razzing the trolls. And this is not like, and just coop through that and still be tethered to them. Because he doesn't have any real interest to watching Kino Casino, especially now more so, and just wants to use them as a prop to get attention. It, and I think like at some point, what may happen at this point is that if they try to get him to be on another show, he may just say no, 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 and then just string PvP along just for smart guys to the point where it's gonna go back to where we started in by the end of last year, where who is gonna like outuse the other? Will PvP get annoyed and done with using DSP as a prop, or will DSP be over PvP with smart guys and this and that? So I'm curious to see where this is gonna lead into the future. Where can PvP coerce DSP to do more dumb shit like this, or will DSP finally realize that there's no use in doing anything with Kino Casino because they don't have his best interest in mind? Like, this really is, as everyone has been saying, the bullied kid hanging out with the bully in hopes that the bully will be his friend. That's all it is. And he can't lose that because he likes that attention. And sure, you could argue that the other half of it could also be that he doesn't want the Kino crowd to go after him either, which I find that very debatable in the sense that they could do that now. I mean, there's really no reason not to, but whatever. So I'm curious to see where this is going to lead into the future of PvP and DSP and Kino Casino and DSP and this and that, and see if something like this will happen, anytime in the future, in the distant future even. But we'll see. But my general thought, if I were to rate this interview, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10. Maybe a 6, but as I said, it wasn't a bad interview in the sense of like it being boring. But you don't get anything new out of it. You just get more. You get to watch DSP squirm a little bit more and get a little bit more frustrated, and then you see him do a massive cope segment where he assures us he's not mad, which is epic win, guys. You when you're mad, the best thing you can say is I'm not mad. Especially, and act as if it doesn't bother you, because that definitely is like what normal people do. They just say it doesn't bother them. When you could just simply ignore it and not even give it that much and say, yeah, I was on it, yeah, it's whatever, and then barrel on through, and then just ignore people in chat talking about it, or just time them out or whatever. But again, just like anything else, this was unlike the side scrolls, I'm glad he admitted, by the way. I'm so happy he admitted that it was on him, because I kind of want to go back and see his reaction to the side scrolls interview onwards, because I'm positive DSP said that they set him up in that interview. I'm positive he did. And then for him to say, oh yeah, I walked into that, it was my fault. So all that time of assuring us that they set him up, now he admits, well, it was my fault, I did it. So he was lying back then, right? So it's all bullshit with him. You're never gonna get a clear answer from him, which people were expecting anyway. They were not expecting DSP to suddenly come clean and be like, oh yeah, I get it, guys. Instead, you just see two people get like frustrated. It was honestly just a genuine argument throughout that stream. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's more of an argument than an interview. Because I think the key point I almost forgot to mention, when DSP kept saying, are you finished? So that way I can like respond and we can move on, which kind of tells Steve that, okay, so he thinks I'm done. I'm not done. There's more stuff I want to go over, so I guess I have to go over more and show him more, then he can respond. And that's Steve's interpretation of what DSP was saying. But he's gonna say, oh, wow, you're talking over me. Can I respond? And then we can move on. Okay, well then look at this. Oh my God, Steve. And it's like, neither of them clarified their point. Like because that's how I at least took it. I mean, obviously in the moment it's very different than when you're watching it happen unfold in front of you. Because I was like, man, Steve should have just said, okay, DSP, like, I'll let you respond, but I have more to say, so can you respond? I'll let you respond, but I'm going to show you more then, right? And then he's like, okay. And then he can respond. Then, okay, so that's the case. Okay, then what about this? Whatever. But it's very clear that there was that miscommunication between the both of them, and DSP kept saying, "Well, you're not letting me talk." So it's a very clear miscommunication that neither of them corrected, which I thought was funny. It was funny for me because it's like, because in the moment you're not going to be thinking that necessarily, but just watching it unfold, I just knew that's what was going on. But yeah, it was a genuine argument more than anything. The other thing that made it very ironic to me was, I remember, to bring up DSP politics, there was that one interview that DSP was reacting to with the Black Lives Matter leader and that one news host, where they're both yelling at each other in that, and DSP was like, "Wow, yeah, this bitch was just yelling and saying things, wasn't even acknowledging what the interviewer was saying." And you watch the Truth Seeker, and it's exactly the same shit. In DSP terms, DSP was just yelling and not listening to what the interviewer was saying. He was being a dumb bitch, right? So it was very like poetic that he watches an interview where the interviewer was like yelling at this other person was yelling back at them, and they were having an argument over the situation. And now you look at this, and it's two people arguing at each other. It's the same kind of interview show as he was reacting to, and it's like, and it's ironic to me because you see that interview with the Black Lives Matter thing. I said this in my politics channel. I didn't really like that clip because you don't really get much out of it. Like, you can glean something from it that may make you like look more into it, sure, but it was just two people arguing. Like, I would much rather like listen to like someone else or just read an article or something like that than just seeing people like just yelling at each other, where one was antagonizing the other and the other one was antagonizing the other, and they were both like instigating the situation. It was basically like rage bait almost. And that's kind of what this kind of fell into. And for DSP to watch that and think, wow, this is meaningful. And then he's in this, and then the next day says, this is dumb. This is drama, and it was just to get views from my detractors. So it's like, okay. It's very clear that when he's watching it, he doesn't care and he thinks that's fine. When he's in that kind of environment, then he realizes maybe this isn't a genuine kind of show or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, like, was Steve trying to be genuine? I think he was. I don't think that Steve necessarily came in wanting to be like, okay, Phil, you're a piece of shit, fuck you. But I do think that as it went on, you definitely feel the lack of patience that Steve was starting to get from talking with DSP, and I think that's kind of what was going on mostly. I think any host should be able to kind of keep that in check, but as I said before, when it comes to DSP, it takes a lot. It really does, because I was watching DSP like since 2015, 2016, and since then I've gotten more and more like impatient, and I've lost all like patience with DSP because you've heard the same stories before, and if anything, it's just been getting worse when it comes to him just saying stuff to get people to get off his back. So I do think on one hand it's like, it's quite natural for anyone who talks to DSP to lose their patience and just be like, and get angry and start yelling. On the other hand, like, people should kind of like try to be more patient and be a little bit more like critical. Like, that's why I think the Side Scrolls interview was probably the best interview that we could have asked for, because it never dissolved into that, where you can't, like, DSP can't really say that interview was in bad faith or unfair, because they did let him talk. They did hear him out, and they were asking him reasonable questions. They weren't like, it was never like, oh, they had insidious schemes behind it or anything. The only scheme I think that they wanted to do was have Keemstar on the call. I think that was the only thing that was somewhat planned to a degree. I mean, I'm not saying that they planned this like for months, but just like maybe in the interview they were thinking, well, since when he got offline, it's like, oh, we get Keem on, and then maybe we could get him back on when DSP reconnects or whatever. I think that's like the most that they set up, and which is a natural thing, obviously, when they had Keemstar on, but it was definitely more than fair in my opinion, and it only looked bad because DSP just could not really answer because he didn't want to. This, I think, like, it wasn't that like Steve necessarily went in wanting to shit on him like 100%, but he definitely wanted to go over the bank leaks. He definitely wanted to like kind of press DSP for these things. I think that's like the most that was set up. But it was very clear that he at least wanted DSP to kind of state his case. It was just when you're having him like talk in circles, you're gonna naturally lose your patience, and I think anyone would in that circumstance. So I don't blame Steve for how he conducted the interview. I just wish that maybe to keep it a little bit more in line and kind of like be a little bit more rational with it than just really losing your patience, because I get it. And, again, you if you talk to DSP, that's gonna happen naturally. I think you're gonna naturally lose your patience when you're just trying to get something from him and he's just not really acknowledging what you're asking. Because it's one thing where it's like if he really can't answer a question. Let's say that like let's say Steve, this is gonna sound really stupid. Let's say Steve was just saying, DSP, give me your social security number right now, give it to me. Like, yeah, he's not gonna do that because it's very personal information, obviously. So he's like, say, no, man, that's personal information. No, give it to me now. Then like that's like ridiculous, But this is like, okay, so like explain curls and twirls. How is this on the bank leaks? And then you went to a haircut, and he would just say, dude, you can't prove that 100%. Where did you get the information? Oh, see, Kiwi Farms. You don't know where that's from. Oh, you can't. You have hard evidence? Can you show me the phone that was used to call this? Like, he wouldn't like acknowledge it fairly. He would just say no, no, no. Like and it was not a good excuse. It was just, you can't prove it, prove it, prove it, prove it. Which is like, dude, like, we have this. This is the proof I have. Like, yeah, this isn't 100%, but you're not explaining why I shouldn't believe it's you, other than it could be fake. But you're telling me that someone hacked this entire thing, and you try to say, well, someone tried to be a different person on a Twitch stream to become a mod, which time-wise and effort-wise is very different. Very different. Because, first off, to make a Twitch account and to talk in a chat, it's very basic. Anyone could do it. Secondly, at least from what I remember from the person who, Marl, I don't think this person ever said that they were a woman to begin with, by the way. I don't think they ever said anything like that. They never, like, did anything, like, hardcore as DC wants us to believe. I think he was just there just, like, chilling. Like, oh, yeah, Phil, I love Overwatch. Oh, yeah, you're so cool, Phil, and that's it. Like, they were like, oh, yeah, man, I'm a girl. I love you guys. Anything like that. Nothing like that. At least from what I remember. So DC wants to make it seem as if it was some grandiose operation, but it really wasn't in reality. But to imply that that's similar to taking the time to modify a bank statement, modify a phone call, and all this stuff, that is a little much. I mean, the only thing he could say is the Comcast thing, but even that may not even have the same effort put into it, because that person might not have worked in Comcast specifically to target DSP. Like, you don't know the motivation to why he got a job to begin with. So that's another thing that he would have to prove, basically, is the intent. But he just looked at his evidence and he didn't even acknowledge or even understand why people would say, that's you, that's your bank account, and said you can't prove it, and even if you can, who cares? Like, these aren't defenses. So that is my general thoughts on the Truth Seeker interview. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from on this. It wasn't bad. It wasn't amazing, but it was probably better than what I was expecting. I was expecting to at least that I was afraid generally that it was gonna be another like gas up operation, like to another thing to feed his ego. I was a little bit nervous about that, but I'm glad it was what it was at the end of the day because I can't think of this interview happening to a nicer person such Aka DSP. DSP is the one person I think deserves this kind of treatment because he's such a piece of shit. So, thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Have a good weekend, everyone. Uh, bye.